So the words from Matthew today have Jesus quoting Isaiah in a theme that is repeated over and over and over in the Bible. In this passage, we find Jesus explaining to the disciples why he speaks in parables, and it has to do with having eyes to see and ears to hear. This is a theme that seems to come up almost every week when we have our discussions. Do we have eyes to see and ears to hear? I think that a big part of stewardship is cultivating our eyes to see the abundance that's before us. Because I believe that God's economy is one of abundance. From the very beginning, God looked upon creation and said that it was good, 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 very good. And we have been entrusted to be stewards, to be caregivers, entrusted to tend to creation's blessings. So this week, as I was trying to pull together thoughts about stewardship and thoughts for this week's message, I went into my office and I was looking for a book, which I didn't find. But instead, I found something else. Eyes to see. I love children's books. I love creative storytelling, and I love, love, love the yummy, good illustration. And this is one of my very favorites. It's my favorite because it was illustrated by Saul Bass, who is a famous graphic designer. And I won't get into, this isn't a graphic design lecture, so I won't get into all of that, but I think he's pretty cool. Anyway, this book was originally published in 1962, and it was written by Lenore Klein. So as I was looking in my office, I was looking for like a really heady academic book that was going to help me think through the theology of having eyes to see abundance when this little beauty called my name. And so if you will allow me, I would like to read to you one of my favorite books. For those of you who are new here today, I don't usually read children's books during the message, just to let you know. This is Henry. Henry is reading a book about Paris, and the words here say things like, Paris is beautiful, Paris is springtime, Paris is lots of people, Paris is many colors. Paris sounds pretty wonderful. Henry does not live in Paris, but wishes he did. He lives in Reboul. Reboul is a little city near Paris. Henry lives in a nice house with flowers in the window and good soup on the stove. Henry's mother and father are very good to Henry. Outside, Henry's house is nice too. It is little and white. Henry has 3 good friends, Andre, Jacques, and Michel. Henry tells his good friends many things about Paris. In Paris, says Henry, there are thousands of buses. Here in Reboul, there's only one. Henry and his friends like to play in the park in Reboul. The park has only 5 trees and 1 squirrel and a little gray church in the middle. In Paris, Henry tells his friends there are many beautiful churches. And there are thousands of trees. And there's a whole zoo full of animals for the many, many people of Paris to see. There are not many people in Reboul. There is Monsieur Manager the baker. There is Monsieur Gogi the mailman. There is Madame Creme who has the cow. And George who drives the bus. And a few more. Oh, how Henry wants to see Paris. One day he can't wait any longer, and so off he goes. And he takes some cheese, a carrot, and a piece of bread in a paper bag. Henry also takes a pencil and a piece of paper with him. He will make pictures of Paris for his friends. Henry walks and walks. He sees a cow eating grass and a bird eating a worm. After a while, Henry gets tired, and he gets hungry too. So Henry stops to eat his own lunch. Now I will sleep, says Henry. But how will I know which way to go when I wake up? I know, says Henry. Henry is very smart. And he puts his pencil down with the tip of the pencil pointing on the road to Paris. Now, says Henry, when I wake up, I will know how to go. The pencil will point the way. And Henry sleeps. While he sleeps, a little bird sees the pencil on the road. This pencil is just the right size for my nest, says the small bird. And the little bird takes the pencil to his nest. But the bird is very little, and the nest is little too, and the pencil is too big for the little bird's nest. So the bird drops the pencil back on the road, just about where Henry had put it. Just about. At last, Henry wakes up. It's getting late. He must hurry to Paris, but which way is Paris? Henry looks at the pencil. Ah, now Henry knows how to go to Paris. He will follow the tip of the pencil. And the bird watches Henry. Henry walks and walks. Soon he sees a city. Ah, says Henry, Paris! Like Raboul, says Henry. Henry goes into the city. He sees a park. In the park, there are 5 trees, 1 squirrel, and a small gray church. What a pretty park, says Henry. It's just like the park we have in Raboul. A bus stops at the park. It's the only bus in sight. And who gets off the bus? Why, Monsieur Manager the baker, Monsieur Gogi the mailman, Madame Creme who has the cow, and a few others. Everyone is in Paris today, says Henry, just like me. Henry sees a street. It's a street just like his street in Raboul. Henry walks down the street, and there at the end of the street is a nice house. It's little and white. There, 3 boys are playing outside the house. What are their names? Why, Andre, Jacques, and Michel. They are Henry's friends. Henry opens the door to the house and goes in. There are flowers in the window. There is good soup on the stove. Henry's mother and father are inside the house too. They smile at Henry. Oh, mother, says Henry. Hello, father, says Henry. It's nice to see you again, but do you know something? I am just as at home in Paris as I am in Raboul. So what do you think about that? I just love that story about a change in perspective, or maybe it's a change in expectations that made everything different. Henry expected to see amazingly wonderful things in Paris. And then, guess what? He saw those things he was looking for right in his own backyard. He already possessed the abundance of wonderful things that he was looking for in his family and his community. And the irony wasn't lost on me that the simplicity of a children's book would help me to tell this story better than that theology book that I never found. In a passage from Luke that is similar to the one from Matthew, Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven will be revealed to infants, to children, while prophets and grown-ups will miss what is before them all along. By tuning our eyes to see the gifts that we have, our aptitudes and our opportunities, our relationships, we can begin to more fully appreciate our blessings. This is why I've really enjoyed digging into the understandings of holy currencies, because our gifts are multifaceted. Time and place, relationship, wellness, truth, leadership, and money. The gifts of our whole self are valued and are needed in the divine economy. Now, we may find ourselves lacking in one area, but we may have an abundance in another area. And when we are in relationship, in community where blessings flow freely, everyone experiences abundance. I think that this is beautiful. I believe that in the abundance of God's economy. And yet, the fear of scarcity seems to be all around us too. I know that I worry about things. So this week I found myself pondering how the fear of scarcity may actually work to create it. On the one hand, grasping onto resources and accumulating literally makes things scarce for other people. When we think about our environment and accumulation and consumption that disrupts the sustainability of creation, we are creating scarcity. But interestingly, the fear of scarcity also seems to make those who have the most feel as if we are lacking, blinded to the true source of blessings, and not letting blessings flow. Walter Brueggemann has said, as Americans, we grow more and more wealthy. Money is becoming kind of a narcotic for us. We hardly notice our prosperity or the poverty of so many others. The great contradiction is that we have more and more money and less generosity. He asserts that the real issue confronting us is whether the news of God's abundance can be trusted in and among this story of scarcity. Recognizing and trusting divine abundance is not about accounting. It isn't about taking stock of everything that we have and everything that we don't have. It isn't about comparing ourselves to others to see how we stack up. That is a dead end. Gospel abundance is about how we live in community and in the world. The stewardship of gospel abundance, then, is not simply about redistributing resources. When we have eyes to see gospel abundance, we begin to recognize that we all have something to offer, and that when a gift is given, it is not merely consumed, it is multiplied. In a cycle of blessing, through giving and receiving, there ends up being more than there was before. This week I was listening to the On Being podcast, and I heard an interview with actress, producer, and nonprofit founder America Ferrera. And she had some words that seemed to speak to this idea. These are her words. Being raised by a single mother who for the majority of my life was the manager of a department of women who cleaned hotel rooms, I was surrounded by women who other people would think of as voiceless, as powerless, as disenfranchised. And they are not. They are stronger, more powerful, more solution-oriented, more solution-driven, more resilient than anyone else I've ever known. And going into people's communities, into their lives, and seeing the ways in which they resist and the ways in which they find joy is so heartening and humbling, because many of us, I think, we sit in our positions of privilege feeling guilty for our privilege, and we live in this idea that we have something that other people might not have access to. But we don't often think about the things we don't have access to, that people we might consider less privileged than ourselves somehow manage to keep at their fingertips at all times. I think that's an amazing perspective. How tempting is it to just look at what we lack rather than looking at what we have to offer? Or how often do we overlook the gifts of others? Or do we find ourselves resistant to receiving gifts from others? Author Sarah Von Brannock is quoted as saying, "Both abundance and lack exist simultaneously in our lives as parallel realities. It is always our conscious choice which secret garden we will tend. When we choose not to focus on what is missing from our lives, but are grateful for the abundance that's present, love, health, family, friends, work, joys of nature, and personal pursuits that bring us pleasure, the wasteland of illusion falls away, and we experience heaven on earth." That sounds to me like having eyes to see. So how might we tend our garden of abundance? How might we stave off those twinges of the fear of scarcity that hold us back from living fully into this cycle of blessing? My grandmother, who is 92 years old, has eyes to see abundance in all things. My whole life, I've always just been so inspired by the way that she sees the world. She grew up with 12 other siblings, and her family didn't own any land. Her dad supported them as a farmhand for most of his life. And so, by any economic definition, they were very poor. But if you hear her tell her stories and you see her world through her eyes, she had the most charmed, the most enchanted childhood. I mean, she truly feels as if she was the most blessed little girl that ever lived. They didn't have money, but they had other currencies in abundance. They were loved and they were nurtured. They had each other. They worked together. They sacrificed for each other, and that cycle of blessing flowed so that they never, ever felt as if they were lacking. Happy are your eyes because they see. Happy are your ears because they hear. The privilege of the prophets and the righteous people didn't mean that they were able to see. Brueggemann has said that the gospel story of abundance asserts that we originated in the magnificent, inexplicable love of God who loved the world into generous being. I think that's beautiful. How do we live into that truth of generous being? I've been wondering this week in this season of gratitude and thanksgiving, how do we prevent our hearts from becoming calloused to the divine abundance? I feel this week like I have had an abundance of ideas and directions. I know that I read way too many things this week. There's so many ideas and thoughts that didn't even make it that are left over for this week. But I invite you now into the conversation. What resonated? How have you experienced abundance? How do you go about tending your garden of abundance?